Thank you so much, Dr. Pasquale. It's also very important to note that the level of care and compassion that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, under the leadership of Dr. Sampson citywide and Dr. Pasquale here in Queens, is amazing when it comes to understanding the needs of our community and expediting and helping us, unfortunately, in the most trying and difficult times. And many of the cases are where the families are still in a very severe level of denial, even as they're sitting in the medical examiner's office. And that's where I say that our amazing staff at the medical examiner's office are also, as Dr. Hirsch of blessed memory used to say, family physicians, and act as the last emotional holdout to help these families keep it together when going through such a very, very difficult time. So we really owe a very big debt of gratitude to the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for all their help and compassion. Now, there was also something that I discussed with Dr. Pasquale very recently, and obviously, we're going to try to be as sensitive as we can while still getting the points across. Everybody in this room, I believe, knows at least one, if not more, of the families that were affected by the recent wave of overdoses that plagued our community in the last 2.5 weeks. And when that happened, I'll just give my personal story, which is why I'm standing here today. I happened to be a volunteer in Hatzalah. 2 weeks ago, right before Shabbat, I was getting dressed, and a neighbor calls my house emergently that I must come outside. And I literally threw on a shirt and a pair of pants, and it was a cold Friday 2 weeks ago, not this past week. And as I run out the house, he points to a car and says, "Do you think she's dead?" This is in the alley behind my house. Those of us that live in this neighborhood know there's a lot of shared alleys. And I look at her, and she had every sign of someone being dead. She was already blue. My wife, who's a nurse, came out to help us as well. And of course, I called it into Hatzalah, and our fellow responders showed up, EMTs and paramedics, and brought her to the hospital. And in that case, she did survive. That surviving lasted 48 hours when she overdosed yet a second time. And the second time she survived as well, and at this point we're trying to explain to her boyfriend and the other concerned families that it's time for her to get help. But I remember going to some of the community leaders that Shabbos. I was literally shaken. If I'm not mistaken, I think Hatzalah had either 4 or 5 overdose calls within like a 30-hour period. So even the members were getting shaken up, and it was just ridiculous. And I remember running on Shabbos to some of the different community leaders and saying, "Guys, this is ridiculous. We need to do something." And they looked at me and said, "It must have just been a bad batch." Now, 2 things I have to say to that. Our community leaders are not experts in tox screening and biochemistry and understanding what batches are good or bad. And before I got an answer to that, whether that was or wasn't the case, my response immediately was, bad batch or not, look at the sheer number of people using drugs in our community that we can have these staggering numbers in such a short amount of time. And then it turned out that it might not have been a bad batch after all, because a lot of these strains were coming from different places, and they were not coming in with the same levels. But either which way, I think we can all agree that, for lack of a better word, we have a magefa on our hands. And unless we, as the community members, stand up and say it's time to do something about it, nothing is going to change. And I have a challenge I always put up. I address this at schools. Now, I will tell you, by the way, last Matzah Shabbos, we had an amazing meeting in this exact space that Rabbi Yaniv and his brother put together with some of the other community rabbis. And I apologize if I shocked them a little bit too much, but I had no choice. And it was a much more intimate meeting, so I was able to speak, very openly. Not that I'm holding much back here tonight. Don't think that for a second. And I put up a challenge, and I'm going to say that the challenge was accepted by 3 of the schools within this community, but I'm going to put it up anyway for everyone to take the message home. Education about addiction, awareness about addiction, is like any other type of safety education we want to give our children. Don't cross the street without looking both ways. I don't know any parent that ever said, I'm scared to tell that to my child because they're going to purposely run in the street. But I'll hear that response from people when we're talking about educating about sexual abuse, educating about boundaries, educating about drugs and alcohol, or when I speak to some of the schools and the principals and I'm like, guys, we got to get awareness in there. No, if we bring it in, people are going to know about it and it's going to make them do it more. So I was giving a lecture to a bunch of high school principals not too long ago. And I offered them that I would love to come into the school and at no cost randomly drug test as many children in that school that I felt necessary. And there were 2 conditions to my request. Number 1, they have to say yes. And number 2 is if anyone tested positive for drugs, they would not be thrown out of school, provided that they were getting the appropriate help. Not one principal accepted me for that challenge. Not one. I'm going to say something now, and I said this a few weeks ago. I'll say it again now. And for those that are here that are high school teachers and principals, I'm sorry. I do not know a single high school today in our community, boys, girls, co-ed, Orthodox, Hasidic, modern Orthodox, or anything in between, that has 0 drugs in it, or where a high school student can't figure out how to get drugs if they wanted to. I'll repeat that again, and I'll repeat it another 100 times if I have to. I do not know a single high school today that a student in the high school will not be able to figure out a way to get their hand on illegal substances or drugs. I don't. But I guess if the leadership in the schools don't allow us to address it, that's going to remain. And that's where we, the parent body, the community members, have that ability to stand up and say enough is enough. This is what we need to do to save our children's lives. We're not talking about, an issue where someone's cutting school or has a problem. We're talking about life and death over here. We're talking about, I dealt with a case not too long ago where somebody jumped over an overpass thinking he was Superman to get hit by a car as he hit the ground. Taken to a hospital, we put him into treatment, and Amudim caseworker stood by his side for about 3 weeks. And I remember going into the principal in the school, and I said, hey, you think we could do something now in the high school with some of your students? And he goes, no, we don't have that problem. This was an isolated incident. Every school. Someone asked which school. It makes no difference. It's all the same. Now, I understand that in our community, like I said before, shame, embarrassment, keeping things under the rug. But that's the stigma that we need to change. We need to be able to confront this issue so we don't have to go to yet another family and say a sibling of yours passed away, a child, a parent, a loved one, a cousin, a friend. My first interaction with addiction, I was 19 years old, and one of my close friends from yeshiva died in a car accident secondary to being high. That was how I got welcomed into this world. And then not too long after that, I had another friend of mine who hung himself in a shower in a yeshiva dormitory, having left a suicide note about the sexual abuse he endured as a young child. I'm no stranger to this. It wasn't like I woke up one day and had nothing better to do with my life and said, hey, I'm going to go break my head to make an organization. Trust me, it's not an easy thing to do. It's extremely difficult, but I felt that I had no choice. Again, it's not that I'm trying to scare everybody here. I just need everyone here to hear the truth and to understand the truth and to internalize the truth. Drugs kills. Silence kills. Shame kills. And until we can stand up and do something about that, I hate to say this, but we are just as liable as everybody else. Because sitting by idly and not doing anything is not the answer. Lo tamar al dam reyecha applies to all of us. We are not allowed to sit by idly and watch anyone that we know go through any unneeded pain or ultimate death. And that's why we're all here tonight. And we'll keep doing these. And if even one person ends up getting help, or one person gets saved by a Narcan kit that we give out shortly, or one family's life is changed, it was already well worth it. But we really need to keep our eye on the prize, and the prize is our future generations. And whether it's focusing on school-based programming, community-based programming, or whatever else it might be, we need to do everything we can to ensure that our loved ones have a great chance at survival and get the help that they desperately need. It's extremely important to also understand that when somebody does have an addiction or a problem and they do confide or they do ask for help, it's that first reaction, that first response that you give that person is going to make all the difference in what treatment they do or don't get, or whether it will or won't be effective. We must be empathetic to them, concerned, compassionate, listen. Don't make promises you can't fulfill. But if somebody comes and says, "Hi, I'm struggling, this is what's happening," the response is, "Thank you for telling me. Let me see what I can do to help." Even if we don't have the answers, there's nothing wrong with saying, "I don't know what to do, but I'm going to try to find someone. You came to the right person." You know, that response of so many people saying, "Oh, I can't believe you're telling me that. You're throwing your life away. You want to end up like so-and-so?" I guarantee you those responses don't help.